Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story.
Subscribe, like, and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
The call came on a Wednesday morning, 2 weeks before Christmas, while I was standing in the garage trying to fix a busted hinge on my daughter's old dresser. It wasn't snowing yet, but the air had that cold, iron taste that told you winter wasn't asking for permission. I recognized the number before I picked up Dean's. My older brother, the family's golden boy, the one who always knew better, did better, and made sure you never forgot it. I answered with a dry, hey, already knowing in my gut this wasn't going to be a catch-up call. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Matt, he said, in that calm, practiced voice he uses when he's about to kick you in the teeth, but wants to sound like he's giving you career advice. Look, I wanted to talk to you about Christmas this year. We've decided to keep it a little smaller. I didn't say anything. I just waited, letting him dig the hole. He was always the one holding the shovel. We're kind of curating the guest list this time, he continued, and I could hear the background hum of his home office, the muted chatter of success oozing through the phone. Just close family. People who've had a good year. You know, that's when it landed. The line. The one that would stick in my chest like a rusted nail for days. Only winners this year. I almost laughed, but it stuck in my throat. My fingers tightened on the screwdriver I was holding, the wood of the dresser pressing into my hip. There was a pause long enough for him to feel uncomfortable, but not long enough for me to take back the silence. Right, I finally said. My voice was flat. Not angry, not sad. Just tired. Don't take it personally, he added, and that's when I wanted to scream. That line, don't take it personally, always meant someone was about to say or do something deeply personal. I won't, I lied, and I hung up before he could spit out another empty justification. The silence in the garage after that call was thicker than the cold. I stared at the dresser, not really seeing it, not really seeing anything, just rerunning the call in my mind like a looping security tape of a robbery you can't stop. The thing is, it wasn't surprising. It was just official now. My own family had drawn a line in the sand, and I was standing on the side labeled failure. I'd been the family embarrassment for years. The guy who tried to start a business and watched it implode in slow motion. The one who got divorced and ended up fighting for weekends with his kids. The one who drove a rusting pickup while Dean posted family photos from Cancun. They never said it to my face, but their eyes did. Their gifts did scratch-off tickets and gas station gift cards while Dean's kids opened MacBooks and drones. Their holiday letters did, the ones that conveniently left me out like I died or moved to another planet. But this year, they just said it out loud. I spent the rest of that day walking in a fog. Didn't eat. Didn't talk to anyone. The girls were with their mom, and the house felt like it had been hollowed out and left for dead. Around 7, I opened a bottle of cheap bourbon I'd been saving for no good reason and poured myself a glass. Sat on the couch. Looked at the tree I hadn't put up yet. Thought about the last Christmas I was invited, how Dean joked about my permanent vacation when I lost my job. How nobody said anything when I choked up during dinner because my ex had just taken the girls to Florida without asking. And I thought about how silence had been my best friend ever since. That night, I poured another drink. Then I opened my laptop. I hadn't posted anything on my old blog in over 3 years. I used to write about small-town life, about fatherhood, about starting over, until it all felt too raw and too real to share. But something in me broke open that night, like a dam finally giving up after years of quiet pressure. The title came out fast, When Your Family Decides You're Not Worth Inviting. I stared at it for a while. My hands hovered over the keys like they weren't sure if I was ready to go there. But then I started typing, and the words came like a flood, jagged, messy, unforgiving. I wrote about the call. About the Christmases where I was the joke, the pitted one, the cautionary tale. About what it feels like to be treated like a stain on the family photo. About how quiet rejection becomes normal. About pretending it didn't hurt anymore. And I wrote without cleaning it up. No filters. No polish. Just blood on the page. I didn't sign it with my name. Didn't think anyone would read it. I just hit publish and shut the laptop. No fanfare. No expectations. But something had changed. It wasn't the article itself. It was the fact that I'd finally said it. Out loud. To someone, even if that someone was just the void. I didn't know it yet, but that blog post was going to rip through the internet like a match in a gas station. It was going to tap into something buried deep in the hearts of thousands, maybe millions, of people who'd been pushed to the edges of their families for not being shiny enough. But for that one night, all I knew was this. I wasn't going to ask for a seat at their table anymore. Because I had just built my own. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like failure. It felt like freedom. I didn't sleep that night. Not really, not the kind of sleep that lets your body rest and your mind go quiet. Instead, I drifted in and out on the couch, the cheap bourbon turning to warm syrup in my veins, my laptop still glowing like a tiny fireplace across the room. The post was still open on the screen, sitting there like a confession I hadn't meant to say out loud, like something I might delete if I sobered up too much. I kept thinking, maybe I crossed a line, maybe I overshared, maybe someone would find it and twist it against me, or worse, maybe nobody would read it at all. At 2 a.m, I hit publish. No tags. No categories. Just me, bleeding through the keyboard, tossing it into the void. Then I closed the laptop with that strange finality you get when you've said everything you weren't supposed to and you know deep down something just shifted. I didn't brush my teeth, didn't change clothes, just passed out right there under a blanket that smelled like an old hoodie and regret. By morning, everything was different. I rolled off the couch to the sound of my phone buzzing on the floor. 5 notifications. Then 10. Then 17. I rubbed my eyes and picked it up, expecting spam or some group text about local snow warnings, but instead I saw something that didn't make sense. Comment alerts, reposts, anonymous shares with captions like, "This hit too hard," and "He just said everything I've never been able to." Confused, I opened the blog dashboard. It was still half loaded when the number flashed up, 10,000 views. I refreshed again, just to make sure it wasn't a glitch. The number jumped to almost 11,000. I sat down on the floor and stared at it for a while, feeling like I'd tripped over something enormous and ancient. It didn't feel like a blog post anymore. It felt like a scream someone finally heard. By noon, it hit 50,000. I kept rereading the comments, one after another, each one more personal and raw than the last. One woman wrote, "I haven't seen my family in 6 years because I married a mechanic." Another guy said, "They don't invite me either because I only drive a delivery truck and didn't go to college." Someone else just wrote this. Just this. And then, right around the second minute of me sitting at the kitchen table, still in last night's flannel shirt, drinking instant coffee that tasted like cardboard and consequences, it hit me. Have you ever been excluded by your own family? Not because you did something wrong, but because you weren't successful enough? Let me know in the comments. I need to know I'm not the only one. That question rolled around in my head like a marble in a tin can. It didn't feel rhetorical anymore. I was looking for something, connection maybe, or validation, or some kind of permission to not feel crazy for the ache that had been building for years. And the world answered back. Loudly. By evening, someone reposted the article to Reddit, under a thread called r/true off my chest. That's when it exploded. Suddenly, it wasn't just a personal piece tucked into a forgotten blog. It was being read out loud on podcasts, quoted in Twitter threads, screenshotted onto Facebook timelines of middle-aged men who never said anything about feelings until that day. That night, I sat back down with my laptop, not to write, but to just watch it unfold. I wasn't even logged in. I was just there, like a ghost at the edge of a party I didn't know I'd started. I watched people debate who wrote it, guess where the story came from, share their own battles with family approval like it was a group therapy session happening in real time across the internet. The weirdest part? I wasn't scared anymore. I should have been. I just dumped the rawest part of myself into the public square with no shield, no name, no context. If Dean found it, he'd know. If my ex read it, she might call it dramatic. If my mom saw it, she'd probably cry, then pretend she hadn't. But none of that mattered now, not really. Because what I had always assumed was my private hell, the rejection, the judgment, the constant feeling like I had to apologize for simply existing outside their mold, turned out to be a shared wound. And that wound was speaking back. People emailed me. Strangers. Hundreds of them. I read every single one. Some of them made me laugh, some of them made me shake, and a few made me cry so hard I had to step outside and just breathe. A retired firefighter wrote me 3 paragraphs about how he still hides his bankruptcy from his kids. A woman in her 60s told me she was cut off after coming out at 49. A kid no more than 20, judging by his writing, said he lived in his car because his dad called him a loser and meant it. It was as if I'd struck some invisible chord. Something that hummed in the ribs of every black sheep, every second son, every divorced parent with a used car and a past. I didn't sleep again that night. This time not because I was numb, but because I was alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. There was something electric in my chest. A spark, maybe? The kind you feel just before something big happens, something irreversible. By morning, my inbox had over 100 unread messages. A literary agent had emailed with the subject line, "Let's talk about expanding this." I didn't answer. Not yet. I just sat in the living room, cross-legged on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, drinking lukewarm coffee and thinking about how a single moment of truth, messy, drunk, half-hearted truth, had echoed farther than 1,000 polished lies ever could. I went to bed a disgrace. I woke up a damn voice for every black sheep in America. When I was a kid, I used to think that famous people must feel something electric in their bones the second the world started watching them, like the whole planet had suddenly tilted slightly in their direction and everything was a little warmer, a little louder, a little more alive. But when I saw my face on the front page of Buzzline's homepage, wide and clear and centered between the words "Anonymous Family Essay Shakes America's Holiday Spirit," I didn't feel electric or loud. I felt still, like the moment before a storm breaks wide open. The article had gone beyond viral by then. Someone had taken my original blog post, tracked down the source, and somehow figured out, or guessed correctly, who I was. It didn't feel possible, but there I was, staring at a candid shot of myself from an old LinkedIn profile I hadn't touched in years. They used the one where I'm wearing the only decent blazer I own, smiling like a man trying to convince the world and himself that everything was going to be fine. The piece was long, smart, and surprisingly empathetic. It dissected the post, pulled quotes, and framed me as a kind of folk hero for the quiet and the cast aside. They didn't just call me a writer, they called me a voice, a mirror, a signal flare for the overlooked. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or throw up. I hadn't showered in 2 days. My sink was full of dishes. I hadn't even told my daughters I wrote the thing. I found out about it the same way everyone else did, by accident. I'd been trying to distract myself, scrolling through headlines while sitting on the back porch with my 3rd cup of bad coffee, when I saw the words "anonymous blogger who broke the internet might be a divorced dad from Ohio" right under the Buzzline logo. I clicked it, skimmed the first few lines, and then froze when I saw my name in the 3rd paragraph. There it was. Full name, town, career history, divorce, the works. That was the moment I knew, whatever this thing was, whatever I'd started, it wasn't mine anymore. 15 minutes after I read the article, the emails started pouring in again. This time, they weren't strangers with stories or distant cousins pretending to care. These were agents, editors, podcast producers, and a woman named Carly who claimed to be from Buzzline itself and wanted to know if I'd be open to an interview, filmed, of course, maybe with a fireplace behind me and a thoughtful mug in my hands. I couldn't bring myself to write her back. But there was one message I did open right away. It came from a woman named Helen Silverman. The subject line was simple: "Let's make a book out of this." I recognized the name immediately, not because I follow publishing news, but because my ex-wife used to read interviews with her out loud from the New Yorker, back when we still read things together in bed. She represented real authors, famous ones, people who win things. Awards, reviews, movie deals. I reread the email 5 times, then stared at it for 10 minutes before I whispered out loud, to absolutely no one, "What the hell is happening right now?" She wrote like she already knew we were going to work together. Confident. Kind, but sharp. She said the piece was one of the most emotionally resonant things she'd read in years. She said she could already hear the audiobook version. She said America needed to hear the full story, not just the blog post, but the whole mess. The before. The silence. The aftermath. My hands were shaking when I stood up and went to the kitchen. I stared at the fridge for a few minutes, like it was going to tell me what to do next. I poured a glass of water and tried to remember the last time I'd felt wanted for something real, not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but because of who I was when no one was looking. I didn't answer her yet. I just let the email sit there like a gift I didn't think I deserved. Around 4 in the afternoon, I got another message, this one from a small publishing house in Brooklyn. They offered a contract. Not a pitch meeting. Not a call. A full contract. It came with a modest advance, still more money than I'd seen in one place in years, and an open invitation to pitch a second book if the first one went well. They said the post had tapped into a holiday season emotional nerve across the country. Their words, not mine. That was the moment it all hit me. I wasn't just some guy yelling into the void anymore. I was on the front page of the largest viral content site in America. I was being quoted by columnists and reshared by strangers, and, somehow, being considered as someone who had something worth saying. And then, just as I was about to close the laptop and go outside to feel the sun on my face for the first time that day, my phone buzzed. I looked down at the screen. It was Dean. I stared at his name for a full 30 seconds, the air going thick in my lungs. It was like seeing a ghost walk into a room where you'd just finished burning all your old letters. Part of me wanted to let it ring out, let the call rot in voicemail purgatory. Another part wanted to answer and ask him, calmly, softly, if he still believed only winners got to sit at the table. But I didn't do either of those things. I just sat there, phone buzzing in my hand, listening to the dull hum of my old refrigerator, knowing with absolute certainty that whatever he wanted now, it had nothing to do with me. He hadn't called to check in. He hadn't called to apologize. He'd called because my name was finally known. When I finally did answer Dean's call, it wasn't because I wanted to talk to him, and it sure as hell wasn't because I thought he deserved my time. It was because I was curious what it sounded like when a man pretends nothing ever happened while quietly choking on the fact that you'd just become more relevant than he ever expected you to be. He started with that fake casual tone he's been using since high school, the one he pulls out when he's trying to sell you something dressed up as a favor. "Hey, Matt," he said, like we hadn't spoken in months because we were just two busy men with lives too full to connect, and not because he literally told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas 2 weeks earlier. I didn't say anything, just let the silence stretch. I could hear him adjusting in his leather chair, probably in his overpriced office lined with photos of fake smiles and plaques for achievements that were as hollow as the man himself. "We saw the article," he said eventually, like it had just happened to cross his feed, like he hadn't been hitting refresh on Buzzline all damn weekend waiting for someone to confirm whether it was really me. "You've really struck a nerve out there. The whole family's been reading it." I almost laughed at that, but it came out more like a cough. Then he said the line, the one that lit a small fire behind my ribs and reminded me exactly who I was dealing with. "We missed you at Christmas." He said it like it was true, like I'd been absent by choice, like I hadn't been directly and coldly uninvited with the words, "Only winners this year." He didn't say those exact words now, of course. He danced around them like they were too toxic to touch, like pretending they never existed might change the memory. I asked him, flatly, "Did you?" "What? Did you miss me at Christmas, Dean? Or did you just not expect that post to take off?" There was a pause, small but telling, just long enough for a man like Dean to consider which version of himself would be more useful in that moment. He chuckled, low and forced, like I'd just made a charming little joke at my own expense. Come on, Matt. Don't be like that. You know how things are, people say dumb things under stress, and we were trying to make the holiday easier this year. He made it sound like excluding me was a logistical issue, like I was some dented kid in the family pantry they just didn't have shelf space for. I didn't answer, not directly. I let the silence work for me. Let him sit in it. Let him remember, even if for a second, that I didn't owe him anything anymore. I'm glad you're getting attention, he added, like he was the older brother giving the younger one a participation ribbon for showing up. We've all been reading the comments. People really connect with it. You've got away with words. That last sentence landed with all the sincerity of a wet paper towel. I imagined him sitting there, rehearsing the line before the call, practicing just enough warmth to pass for genuine, not realizing that after years of being told I was a burden, a screw-up, an embarrassment, I could smell condescension before it even left his throat. The call didn't last long after that. I didn't hang up on him, didn't yell, didn't throw anything. I just let him talk himself out, and when he finally said, we should get together soon, I told him, maybe, and meant not in this lifetime. The next morning, the group chat lit up like Vegas. It had been dead for weeks, months, really, and suddenly, like someone flipped a switch, all my cousins, second cousins, and aunts I hadn't heard from since the Obama administration were in there tossing out little digital hugs and emoji-filled congratulations. Just saw the article. Wow, Matt, incredible. Proud of you, man. Always knew you had it in you. This is what redemption looks like. Inspirational stuff. I stared at my phone in disbelief, watching as the same people who once referred to me as the one with the failed landscaping thing suddenly acted like they'd been quietly cheering me on from the wings all along. One cousin, Chad, a guy who literally laughed out loud at my toast during a wedding once and called me the family poet who couldn't pay his bills, posted a selfie of himself holding a copy of Buzzline, printed out like it was a yearbook photo. No one mentioned Christmas. No one mentioned Dean's phone call. No one said a damn word about the years of silence, or the Thanksgiving I spent alone eating cold takeout because no one bothered to invite me even as a formality. Now, because the internet had validated my pain with shares and likes and viral reach, I was suddenly worth remembering again. My name had become a commodity, something to mention in passing to coworkers, a story to retell at brunch. But I hadn't forgotten. I hadn't forgotten the wedding 6 years ago when Dean introduced me during his speech not as his brother, but as our family's resident philosopher/entrepreneur, and then made a crack about my zen approach to unemployment, while everyone laughed and clinked glasses like it was all just good-natured ribbing. I hadn't forgotten the time I tried to start a conversation in that same group chat after my business folded, asking for advice, for anything, and not one of them replied. Not a single word, not even a damn thumbs up. Now they were all here, parading around like they'd known all along I was going to turn it around, like they'd been part of the journey and not the reason I started writing in the first place. The cursor blinked in the group chat box. It blinked and blinked and blinked. I thought about typing something cutting or clever or scathing, but I didn't. I didn't give them a word. I just stared at that blinking line like it was a heartbeat, steady and quiet, pulsing in the space between who I used to be and who I was about to become. Because sometimes the loudest thing you can say is absolutely nothing at all. The email came at 8:32 in the morning while I was still in bed, head pounding from a night spent answering messages I never expected to get, from people I'd never met but who somehow seemed to know me better than my own family ever did. It was from Helen Silverman again, this time with a subject line that felt more real than anything I'd seen in years. Let's make it official, offer enclosed. I opened it slowly, like it might explode if I clicked too fast, and when I saw the words "to-book deal" and "advance offer," my heart thudded like I'd been running for miles, even though I hadn't moved an inch. The amount made me stop breathing for a full 5 seconds. It wasn't retirement money or anything obscene, but it was more than I'd made in any single year of my adult life. It was enough to wipe out my debt, fix the truck, maybe even start saving for the girls' college funds again. It was enough to prove, not just to them, or Dean, or my mother, or the entire judgmental machinery of our family tree, but to myself, that I hadn't wasted the last decade of my life learning the hard way how to survive. The deal was for 2 books. One nonfiction, based on the original post and the story behind it, and one open-ended, fiction or memoir or whatever I wanted, as long as it came from that same raw place that had caught fire across the country. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd cried more than once over unpaid bills and unread job applications, and I read the contract twice. Then I called Helen and told her yes. She didn't squeal or gush or try to flatter me, she just said, "Good. I knew you would," like she'd already seen the next 10 years of my life written out in chapters. We talked for an hour about timelines and titles and publicists, and by the end of it, I felt like someone who had finally stepped into a life that had been waiting in a locked room for far too long. The contract was signed that afternoon. The email from my ex-wife came less than 24 hours later. The subject line was just my name, nothing else. That's how I knew she didn't want anything, not money, not favors, not an apology. She just wanted to reach out. I stared at it for a long time before clicking. Inside, it was only 2 lines. Saw your article. The girls are proud. Thought you should know. There wasn't a period after that second sentence. It ended soft, like she hadn't been sure whether to say more or if saying less would land harder. I sat there staring at it, thinking of all the years we spent trying to navigate each other's damage, all the ways we'd misunderstood the things we each needed. I thought about the fights, the long silences, the way I used to disappear into myself when things got hard, and how she always assumed that meant I didn't care. But I did care. God, I cared so much I couldn't even form the words for it sometimes. And now, here she was, not angry, not sarcastic, just passing the message along from the 2 people who mattered more to me than anything else on this planet. An hour later, the girls FaceTimed me from their mom's house. They were sitting at the kitchen counter, eating cereal and wearing Christmas pajamas that were too early in the month, but too cute to argue with. "Dad," my oldest said, her eyes wide with something between pride and disbelief, "are you gonna be on TV now?" Her little sister jumped in without waiting. "Can I tell people at school that my dad's famous?" I laughed, real and full, the kind that comes from the stomach and feels like a release. I told them I wasn't famous, not really, and that there wouldn't be any TV for now, just writing, just more words, just me trying to turn all this mess into something worth reading. They didn't care about the details. All they cared about was that, for once, their dad was in the spotlight for something good. Not for falling down. Not for losing another job or forgetting a school form or missing another family event because I couldn't afford the gas. This time, it was different. And I swear, in that moment, looking at their faces on that grainy screen, something inside me clicked into place. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about proving anyone wrong. It was about the quiet power of standing back up, of refusing to stay where they left you, of turning the worst day of your life into the first line of a story people actually want to hear. I got off the call and went outside. It had started to snow lightly, the kind of snow that doesn't stick but still whispers something sacred into the air. I looked at the sky, my breath curling up in little clouds, and for the first time in what felt like years, I felt like I was in control of something again. Not just the story, not just the words, but my damn life. I went back inside and printed the contract, even though it was already signed and filed digitally. I wanted to feel the weight of it in my hands. I wanted to put it somewhere physical, on the fridge, under a magnet, like a kid's drawing, just so I could see it every time I walked by and remember that this didn't happen by accident. It happened because I finally told the truth. And the truth, the messy, broken, bleeding truth, had found its way into people's hearts. The messages kept coming in all day. Old friends I hadn't spoken to in years. A guy from college I barely remembered who said my post made him cry. A teacher from high school who said she always knew I had a voice. But none of it, not the money, not the attention, not the praise, hit me the way that one moment did, when I closed the laptop and looked around the same old kitchen I'd once felt trapped in. Funny, nobody wanted me last week. Now, even my past is knocking. The email came first, and it came from Dean, which already told me everything I needed to know about the motive behind it. It was dressed up politely, of course, phrased in that clean, corporate slick language he always used when trying to sound like the bigger man. Subject line: family dinner, would love to see you there. It was the kind of message someone writes with a glass of scotch in one hand and a marketing textbook in the other, carefully constructed to seem warm while not actually saying a damn thing real. In the body of the email, he laid it out like an olive branch, or at least something he thought I'd interpret as one. "We're putting together a little dinner," he wrote. "Just a small gathering with the family. Would be great to see you and celebrate all the exciting things happening in your world right now." He didn't say the word success. And he sure as hell didn't mention the blog post or the book deal or the fact that he'd essentially exiled me from Christmas 2 weeks earlier with a line that still echoed in the back of my skull like a bad joke no one's willing to admit was cruel. I didn't respond. 2 days later, my phone rang, and this time, it was Mom. Her name flashing on the screen brought back a mixture of dread and tired affection, the kind you reserve for people who have loved you all your life, but have also let you down more times than you've bothered to count. I answered, knowing exactly what was coming and still bracing myself like I was stepping into a cold lake. She didn't waste time. "Matthew," she began, her tone already leaning heavy on guilt and light on grace, "your brother says he invited you to the dinner." I said nothing, letting her fill the silence the way she always did when I was a kid and didn't immediately give her what she wanted. And of course, she delivered right on cue. "Family's family, Matthew. Don't be like that." That phrase, recycled through the decades, landed like a slap dressed in lace. It was always the fallback line, "family's family," the same thing she said when Dad disappeared for 4 days and came back pretending nothing happened. The same thing she whispered at me during my divorce when I told her what my ex had said to me in court. The same phrase she offered, quietly, after Dean humiliated me at that wedding years ago with a mic in his hand and a room full of laughter. "Family's family." As if that meant anything when your own blood slices you open with a smile and expects you to thank them for the cut. "I'll think about it," I said, voice flat, heartbeat loud. She sighed like I'd just told her the world was ending. We hung up shortly after, both pretending something had been resolved, though nothing had even been acknowledged. Later that night, I found myself sitting alone at a bar downtown, a place I used to come when I still believed that if I drank slowly and listened hard enough to the jukebox, the answers might just float down from the ceiling and land quietly in my glass. It was nearly empty. Just a couple of regulars at the far end and the bartender cleaning taps like he'd been doing it since the Reagan era. I sat in a cracked leather booth with a bourbon in front of me, turning Dean's invitation over and over in my mind like a bad penny I couldn't stop touching. What would I be walking into if I said yes? A dinner in my honor sounded about as genuine as a Hallmark card from an ex. Dean didn't throw dinners to honor people, he threw events to manage appearances. The idea that he'd planned a warm, welcoming family gathering without some kind of PR angle attached to it was almost laughable. And the worst part was, I could already see how it would go. I'd walk into that room, and everyone would clap or smile or pretend this was just a normal thing we all did, that they'd always supported me, always believed in me, always thought I was just one good break away from being worthy of their company. But I knew the truth. I remembered the Christmas 3 years ago, the one that was already strained, because I'd just lost my job, where everyone brought me gifts that felt like a joke wrapped in shiny paper. Dean handed me a little envelope with a smug grin and said, "It's the gift of possibility." Inside were 5 scratch-off lottery tickets. He thought it was hilarious. Everyone laughed. I pretended to laugh too. Later, in the bathroom, I flushed them down the toilet without even checking them. Not because I was angry, but because I knew in their eyes I'd become someone who needed luck more than he deserved dignity. So no, I didn't believe the dinner was about me. I believed it was about them, about reclaiming me before the rest of the world did. About polishing the family name before I dragged it through any more truth. I sat there with that bourbon, staring at the glass like it might have something to say. I thought about my daughters, about how proud they were when they read my name on that article. I thought about Helen's voice on the phone when she said, "You've got power now, Matt, don't give it away." And I thought about all those years I spent chasing approval from people who only offered it when they felt like it would cost them nothing. So when I walked out of that bar, coat zipped tight against the cold, boots crunching against the sidewalk like punctuation marks on a sentence I'd finally finished rewriting, I pulled out my phone and opened the email from Dean. My thumb hovered over the reply button for a moment, but I didn't press it. Instead, I just closed the app, put the phone in my pocket, and kept walking. I told them I'd think about it. I already knew the answer. I arrived 32 minutes late on purpose, not out of pettiness or passive aggression, but because I needed to remind myself that this wasn't a meeting I had asked for, nor was it a moment I had agreed to on their terms. I parked 3 houses down from Dean's just so I wouldn't have to deal with someone opening my door or greeting me at the driveway like they were doing me a favor by letting me show up. The house was lit up like a damn Christmas card, the kind you receive from people you haven't seen in years, with perfect children and matching outfits, smiling like nobody in that photo had ever said a cruel thing behind closed doors. As I stepped up to the front door, I paused for a second, my hand resting against the frame, the warmth from inside leaking out through the cracks. I could already hear the familiar buzz of conversation, silverware clinking against plates, wine glasses being gently set down on granite countertops. For a moment, I thought about turning around, walking back to the truck, driving off to somewhere quiet and anonymous where the only person expecting anything from me was myself. But I didn't. I rang the bell. Dean answered the door, of course, his smile too wide, too polished, as if he'd spent the entire morning practicing it in the mirror. "Matt," he said, drawing out the name like he was unwrapping a gift he didn't ask for. "You made it." I nodded but didn't return the smile. I stepped past him without invitation, hung my coat on the hook I hadn't used in years, and walked into the living room, where every conversation stopped just long enough to make the silence uncomfortable. Faces turned, some smiling too much, others avoiding eye contact entirely, as if I were a ghost who had shown up before they had time to light the candles and cast the protective spells. My mother was the first to approach me, arms already opening for a hug I didn't decline, but didn't return with much enthusiasm either. She looked up at me afterward, her eyes glassy with either pride or guilt. I honestly couldn't tell. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered, like I was a soldier coming home from a war I never signed up for. Dinner was already halfway over, though they had clearly saved a seat for me right between my cousin Andrew, who once told me I should have gone into construction after my business failed, and Aunt Lisa, who made a show of patting my shoulder like she'd just spotted a stray dog she used to feed. The food was warm, the plates were fine china, and the wine was expensive enough to taste like nothing at all. Dean stood after dessert was cleared, holding his glass in that familiar way that always signaled something performative was about to happen. "Well," he said, looking around the table with mock humility, "I just want to take a second to recognize someone special tonight." He didn't look at me right away, too staged for that. He let the pause build just long enough for people to glance my way, to turn their heads and prepare for the speech they assumed was coming. "Matt," he finally said, locking eyes with me like we were equals. "You've had quite the year. I think I speak for everyone when I say we're proud of you and we're glad you're here." There were claps. Actual applause. Hesitant, awkward, fragmented clapping that sounded more like a golf course than a celebration. My cousin Chad even let out a half-hearted here, as if the man had ever rooted for me in his life. Then, of course, someone, maybe Aunt Lisa, maybe one of the cousins, said it. Matt, say a few words. The whole room turned toward me. Some smiling, some expectant, a few, including Dean, just trying to measure how much power I thought I had now. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in that room on my shoulders, and I took my time picking up my glass. I looked around, taking each face in one at a time, the ones who'd ignored me, dismissed me, pitied me, laughed at me, and now, tonight, wanted to fold me back in like I'd never left. I opened my mouth, and for half a second, even I wasn't sure what would come out. There was so much I could have said. I could have talked about what it felt like to be shut out of the same house a month ago by a man who now claimed to be proud. I could have listed every moment they made me feel like less, like the failure they used as a conversational buffer between their own insecurities. I could have called out the hypocrisy, the timing, the performance of it all. But instead, I closed my mouth. I raised my glass slowly, locked eyes with Dean, who smiled nervously now, just a twitch in the corners of his mouth betraying the control he thought he still had, and I nodded. Not a deep bow, not an exaggerated gesture, just a single, silent nod. Then I sat down. No speech, no words, no performance. And the silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Someone tried to fill it with a cough. Another with a polite chuckle. But the point had landed, right there in the center of the table between the empty dessert plates and the untouched wine glasses, a statement louder than anything I could have possibly said with words. Because sometimes power doesn't come from being heard. Sometimes it comes from refusing to explain yourself to people who only start listening when they think you might make them look better by association. The conversation eventually picked up again, lighter and more cautious than before, as if they were trying to reset the mood without admitting that something had shifted. Dean avoided eye contact for the rest of the evening. My mother kissed my cheek again before I left, her lips trembling just slightly. No one else said much, and no one asked for a follow-up toast. As I stepped out into the cold night, the sky above me wide and clean and dark, I took a deep breath and smiled, not because I'd won anything, not because I'd proved anyone wrong, but because I had said exactly what I needed to, in exactly the right way. Sometimes silence says more than any speech ever could. It had been exactly 7 days since that strange, brittle dinner, and I hadn't heard a single word from Dean, no follow-up, no thank you, no attempt to pretend what happened around that table was some kind of warm reunion or family healing moment. He hadn't called, hadn't texted, and hadn't sent some passive-aggressive link to a podcast about letting go of resentment like he used to when we were younger and he wanted to moralize without getting his hands dirty. But on the 8th morning, while I was making coffee in the kitchen, barefoot and still half asleep, my phone buzzed with a message from a name I hadn't seen pop up in years. It was from Elise, Dean's wife, a woman who'd always worn politeness like perfume, strong at first, but disappearing quickly under pressure. The message was short. No greeting, no explanation, no filler. You were right. About everything. Just those 6 words. Not a period, not a signature. I stood there staring at it, mug in hand, sunlight barely spilling across the counter, and I let the words hang in the air like smoke after a house fire. There was a time when a message like that would have cracked me open, made me reply with a desperate, "Why didn't you say something sooner?" or "Thank you, I needed to hear that." But this time, I didn't respond. I didn't even let myself type a reply and delete it. I just held the phone for a moment longer, then pressed down on the message and hit delete. There was no satisfaction in it, no cinematic release or triumphant swelling of music behind my ribs. Just quiet. Just a strange sense of something closing without the need for ceremony. That same afternoon, the publisher sent over the mock-up for the book cover. I hadn't asked to be on the front. In fact, I'd specifically said I didn't need my face anywhere near it. But the designer sent 2 versions anyway, one abstract and tasteful, the other bold and personal. And there it was, my face, black and white, staring dead into the lens, not smiling, not scowling, just existing. Underneath my name were the words, when they said I wasn't welcome. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it either. But I didn't flinch when I saw it, which told me something had shifted. The man on that cover didn't look like a ghost anymore. He didn't look like someone waiting to be forgiven by people who hadn't earned the power to offer forgiveness in the first place. He just looked ready. I took a walk that evening, partly to clear my head, partly to feel the cold air sharpen my thoughts, partly because I didn't know what else to do with myself now that the book was real and the silence from Dean's side of the family was deafening again. The walk took me past downtown, past the library, past the bar where I'd once sat deciding whether or not to reply to the dinner invitation. And without meaning to, I turned down a familiar block and found myself across the street from the office building Dean worked in. It was after 6, and the place was mostly dark except for a few lights still glowing behind tinted glass. I saw him in there, sitting at his desk near the back, shoulders hunched, phone to his ear, fingers drumming on the table like a man waiting for someone to give him good news that never quite arrives. He looked tired, smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but in some deeper way, like the performance had drained something from him that he couldn't get back. I stood there for a moment, hands in my pockets, watching him through the glass like a stranger. I didn't wave, didn't knock, didn't want to be seen. I just watched, and as I turned to leave, I whispered to myself under my breath, quiet and clear. Still not welcome, huh? I wasn't angry when I said it. I wasn't bitter either. It was more like an observation. A nod to the fact that no matter how many people praised the post, or bought the book, or told me they saw themselves in my story, Dean would probably never see me the way I saw myself now. And maybe he didn't have to. The drive home was silent, no music, no distractions, just the soft hum of the tires and the occasional flicker of passing headlights. I thought about Elise's message again, about how much truth could be packed into 6 words, and how sometimes the people closest to the damage are the last to admit there's a fire burning through the walls. I thought about my daughters, how they had started asking more questions lately, not about the book, but about me, about who I was before they were born, about why things went the way they did between me and their mom. And I realized I wasn't afraid of those questions anymore. I didn't need to protect a version of myself that no longer served anyone. The next day, I boxed up a few old photos, old journals, and printouts of the early drafts of the blog post that started it all. I labeled the box Keep and slid it into the hall closet. Not because I wanted to live in the past, but because I wanted to remember that even the messiest chapters deserve a place on the shelf. Helen called me that afternoon to talk publicity. She said the publisher wanted me to go on a podcast, then another, then maybe do an interview for a morning show. I told her I'd think about it. She laughed and said, "You always say that. And maybe that's okay. Maybe I'll do the interview. Maybe I won't. Maybe Dean will read the book when it comes out. Maybe he'll skim it and convince himself none of it applies to him. Maybe Elise will say something. Maybe she'll stay quiet forever. It doesn't really matter now, because they taught me how to disappear. I just never told them I learned how to win.